welcome to the deep dive. We are so glad you're here joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out with us. We've got a really, just a fascinating one lined up for you.
We really do. Today we're looking at these excerpts from a piece called The Architecture of a Divided Soul.
Right, which is just a great title.
It's an incredible title, and it's basically this bold, almost startling confession by a 58-year-old author.
Yeah, and the mission for our deep dive today is to really unpack this claim they make. They argue that they're basically living a quiet double life, right? Because, according to them, modern political and social movements just demand this exhausting total agreement.
Yeah, and before we jump into the weeds on this, I do need to state something really clearly for you listening. This source material, it definitely touches on some very politically charged themes.
Oh, absolutely. It goes right there.
It does. But this deep dive, our conversation right now, is completely neutral. We're not endorsing any political ideology. We aren't condemning any.
Right, we're just analyzing the mechanics.
Exactly. We just want to understand the psychological and the philosophical framework the author is presenting.
Yeah, the underlying architecture of their argument.
Which actually brings us perfectly to the title and the core contradiction right at the start of the piece. The author declares, quote, "I'm conservative at home and liberal in the streets."
Which is quite the statement to open with.
It's a sledgehammer. And they even admit right away that some people see this as a betrayal. They say, I've been called worse, but that contradiction is the most honest thing I can offer.
And that word choice in the title, it's doing so much work. Architecture?
Yeah, architecture implies something you planned.
Exactly. It's deliberate. You don't accidentally architect a building. You have blueprints, you account for stress and load-bearing walls.
Oh, right.
But then they pair it with a divided soul. And traditionally, a divided soul sounds like a tragedy, right?
Like something is tearing apart.
Like cognitive dissonance, which psychology tells us is this painful state our brains desperately want to fix. But the author's totally reframing this.
They're saying the division isn't a weakness.
Right. It's the actual design. It's a sturdy architecture.
It makes me think about actual building architecture. Imagine an inspector looking at a blueprint.
Okay.
And half the house is this incredibly strict, heavy, traditional foundation, like a fortress. But then the public-facing exterior is a completely modern, fragile, open-concept glass pavilion. The inspector would say, "You're crazy, right?"
It'd say the structure's going to tear itself apart under pressure.
Exactly. But in human psychology, contradictions are sometimes the very pillars holding us up. And I want you, the listener, to think about this for a second. Have you ever felt like you're betraying a group you belong to just because you had a nuanced thought?
Oof, yeah. That fear of betrayal is huge.
It is, because society treats nuance as treason right now. If you don't align perfectly, you're the enemy. Which leads us to the author's next big point, this geography of exhaustion.
Yeah, so the author zooms way out here. They note that over decades, because remember, they're 58, they've been watching this for a while.
Right, pre-internet even.
Exactly. They say they've watched this pressure build across continents. They specifically list Lagos, London, Sao Paulo, and Seoul.
Which are very different places.
Wildly different. But they claim people in all these places are living that same quiet double life because movements everywhere demand total agreement. The quote is, "The exhaustion is universal. The packaging just changes."
Okay, I have to push back on the author here a little bit.
Go for it.
Is it really the same? Someone in Sao Paulo or Lagos is dealing with, life or death economic disparity.
Right.
And the author is comparing that to, say, ideological debates in London. It feels a little like they're projecting their own specific ideological fatigue onto the rest of the world.
That's a super fair critique. But let's look at that specific phrase again. The packaging just changes. The author isn't actually saying the specific politics or the physical struggles are identical. They're talking about the psychological demand.
The demand for conformity.
Exactly. Whether it's a labor movement in Seoul or a social justice push in London, the operational machinery of modern movements functions exactly the same way. It's all or nothing.
Right. There's no room for the divided soul.
None. And living that quiet, double life, it has a massive cost. Neurologically, hiding your true thoughts from your in-group spikes your cortisol.
Because you're constantly hypervigilant.
Yes. You're self-censoring, scanning the room, making sure you don't say the wrong thing. It's a chronic, allostatic load on the body. That is the exhaustion they are talking about.
And it's fascinating that they bring up their age. Being 58 means they remember a time when the street and the home were actually separated.
Right, before the smartphone.
Exactly. You used to be able to go to a protest and then go home and just be messy and complex. Now, the street is in your pocket.
The surveillance is constant.
It really is.
Yeah.
So if total agreement is that exhausting, how does the author actually balance their own contradictions? How do the conservative home and the liberal street interact without the whole thing collapsing?
This is where the piece gets incredibly practical. They define their home values as structure, responsibility, faith, family.
A strict foundation.
Right. But they argue these don't cancel out their liberal public actions. Crucially, they say those home convictions actually compel them toward public justice.
Wow.
Yeah, they write, you can't genuinely believe in personal responsibility and then ignore a system that makes responsibility nearly impossible for some people to exercise.
That is such a profound bridge between the personal and the systemic. I like to think of it like a fitness coach.
Okay, lay it on me.
So imagine a really strict fitness coach. They totally believe in personal discipline, hard work, no excuses.
Very conservative home values in this analogy.
Right. But then this coach looks at the track they are asking their client to run on, and the track is literally covered in landmines. So their very belief in fair, hard work compels them to go out and clear the landmines first. They have to fix the environment so the personal responsibility can actually happen.
That is a brilliant analogy. It really shows how the author is redefining conservatism and liberalism here.
Not as opposing political parties.
No, but as complementary tools. You use one to build the self, to cultivate discipline, and you use the other to navigate and correct society.
Yeah, to clear the landmines.
Yeah.
And it takes the ego totally out of it. The author talks about fighting for someone else's right to live differently than they do.
Which is the ultimate test, right?
It really is. It means your public policy isn't just about validating your personal lifestyle. It's about letting other people have agency.
Exactly. And because this internal architecture is so deliberate, the author draws some very strict boundaries about who they associate with.
Right. This is where we need to be really careful and reiterate that we are just analyzing the author's critique here. We are looking at their rejection of false authenticity.
Yes. The author explicitly states, and I quote, "I am not Madigo. I am not Black Mago."
And they accuse that brand of politics of wrapping itself in the language of authenticity while actually demanding rigid conformity.
Right.
But wait, help me understand that. How does a movement use authenticity to demand conformity? Aren't those two things opposites?
You'd think so, but in social psychology, this is a known tactic. Movements will hijack universal human values, like hard work or family or structure.
Values the author deeply holds at home.
Exactly. The movement packages those universal values and claims exclusive ownership over them. They use the authenticity of that value as the hook.
Like, hey, you value discipline, so you belong with us.
Right. But once you're in, they weaponize that shared value to demand you agree on 100 other unrelated policies.
Oh, I see.
And you can hear the defensive tone in the author's writing here. They say, those are my values. They belong to me. It's this primal fight to retain individual ownership over your own morality.
They refuse to let their personal discipline be co-opted by a flag or a figure.
Exactly. They won't let their foundation be hijacked.
Which brings us to this broader philosophical conflict. The burden of what the author calls the messy human standard.
Yeah, because refusing to join a faction is hard.
Really hard. The author admits they aren't a purist. They don't fit into any doctrine. They joke that conservatives question their liberalism and liberals question their conservatism.
And they say both sides have a point.
Right. But they argue ideological purity was never the goal. Being true to yourself is the standard. And they make this bold claim that being true to yourself is actually harder to maintain than any party line.
And psychologically, that makes perfect sense. A party line is essentially a pre-written script.
A cognitive cheat sheet.
Exactly. It requires zero thinking. If a complex issue pops up, you don't have to wrestle with it. You just check the platform to see what your side is supposed to think.
But if you drop the script, you have to do constant, exhausting internal auditing.
You have to evaluate every single issue on its own merits, holding all those contradictions. It's metabolically expensive for the brain.
It's like buying a mass-produced suit off the rack versus tailoring one.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Like the party line is the mass-produced suit. It's easy, you just buy it. But the author is trying to tailor a suit to their exact, asymmetrical, messy human body.
It takes way more work.
Way more work. And brand loyalists will look at it and say it looks wrong. But for the author, it's the only thing that actually fits.
That's a great way to look at it. And the tragedy, as the author points out, is that the loudest voices are the ones writing the off-the-rack scripts.
Yeah, the extremes dictate the norm.
Right. Most people actually hold positions that are, quote, messier, more specific, and more human. But they stay quiet because of the loud minority.
So I want to ask you listening right now, think about your own beliefs. How many of your actual opinions are messier and more specific than the label society tries to slap on you?
I bet it's almost all of them.
Probably. Which brings us to the climax of this deep dive. The author talks about expanding convictions and fundamentally redefining what societal progress looks like.
Yeah, they claim that holding opposed positions actually expands your convictions. It doesn't dilute them.
They say it's hard to see the other side as enemies once you've lived a little of both.
Right.
But let me play devil's advocate here.
Do it.
Doesn't living a little of both risk making someone totally paralyzed? Like, if you understand everyone's point of view perfectly, how do you ever take a stand on anything?
It's a valid worry. But look back at the text. The author does take a stand. They are literally out fighting in the streets.
True.
The empathy, the living a little of both, it doesn't prevent action. It prevents dehumanization.
Oh, wow.
Right? If you hold some of the core values of the people you disagree with, you can't view them as monsters. It completely eliminates the concept of an enemy.
You can fight the policy without destroying the person.
Exactly. And that leads to the final, just incredible quote from the piece. Progress isn't uniformity of feeling. It's the freedom to be called a traitor and stay standing anyway.
That is just, it's so powerful. Because the modern definition of progress is basically utopian. Right? Great.
Right, the idea that eventually everyone will agree on the exact right way to think.
Exactly. But the author's saying, no, that's not progress. True progress is having the resilience to withstand being alienated for your nuance.
It's the psychological endurance to let both sides yell at you and not crumble.
To stay standing in your messy architecture.
Exactly.
What a journey this has been today.
Seriously, we've covered so much ground.
We really have. We started with the exhaustion of that quiet double life, moved through how the strict home values compelled a fight in the streets, and ended up rejecting the scripts written by the loudest voices.
It's a lot to process.
It is. So, to wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on what we just discussed.
Okay.
The author says progress is the freedom to be called a traitor and stay standing. But imagine if tomorrow, everyone in the world just decided to drop their scripts.
Oh, wow.
Right? What if everyone just embraced their own messy, contradictory architecture out in the open? Would the concept of a traitor even exist anymore?
That's a wild thought.
If we're all divided souls, maybe we're actually entirely whole. So next time you feel that pressure to perfectly align with the crowd, just something to think about.
Really gives you some perspective.
It does. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the scripts you're handed, and we will catch you next time.